Hey folks, welcome to Guitar Daily. It's Nick Granville coming to you from Wellington, New Zealand. Today I thought I'd discuss how to get a good guitar tone. Obviously guitar tone is subjective. What one person considers a good guitar tone could be different from another person, but this may be something that helps beginners or helps like intermediate level players. Pro players already know this, because if your career is like making sound, which is what it is when you're a pro player, right? Then you already know how to do this and you don't need my advice. But you know, maybe this might be helpful to some. First thing I would say, number one, is you need to have a sound in your head before you're going to be able to create a sound, right? If you can't picture in your head what a guitar sound is going to be, you don't stand a chance, right? A sound like that, I already have an idea in my head before I created that sound. Now, how do you get that? So go listen to some records, check out other players, check out what's going on, and kind of get a thing. For me, one of the best jazz guitar sounds, if I want a clean jazz guitar tone, I think of Wes Montgomery, right? So Wes Montgomery becomes like my benchmark for what I want to achieve, right? If I think of a rock guitar tone, I think of someone like Michael Landau for a certain kind of thing, or maybe Steve Lukather, or Eddie Van Halen. Those are three people whose rock tone I really appreciate and kind of inspire me. If I think of a classical guitar tone, I think of John Williams, right? If I think of a blues guitar tone, there's lots of different people, but Robin Ford always comes up pretty quickly, although, you know, kind of he straddles jazz and blues, right? But Robin Ford comes up quickly. I quite like the Jimi Hendrix thing when he plays the blues, right? That's kind of cool. But then also like Muddy Waters and B.B. King is right at the top of my list. Chris Kane is the top of my list. So I have a picture in my mind for what I'm wanting to achieve. It's one of the reasons that if you see any great player, they can make any gear work, right? Someone like Michael Landau, who I just mentioned, if he goes to play a gig in New Zealand, he's probably not bringing his amp. He's getting a backline amp, which may work like he wants it to or may not. It could just be whatever, right? And so therefore he can manipulate the equipment to get the sound that he's hearing in his head. So the first thing is to hear the sound in your head. Second thing I would say is get to know some equipment, right? Whatever gear you've got right now, you should be able to get the sound in your head out of that equipment. So for example, say you have a solid state PV amp and you have a Squier Strat and you have a Tube Screamer. You could probably get a Stevie Ray Vaughan type tone if Stevie was what you were going for, right? If you knew how to get it in your head. And the same thing applies with modelers. I think if you have a modeler, if you don't have a sound in your head, you're not going to achieve anything. But using a modeler just means you manipulate that equipment to get the sound that you want. That's the first thing. That's the second thing I would say, is just experiment with the equipment you have and try and reproduce sounds. Third thing I would say that helps towards getting good tone is having a certain touch on your instrument. If you're somebody who hits really hard all the time, you're probably not going to have a good sound. Just period. Like if you hit hard all the time. Unless you play punk music, then that could be appropriate for the style. But for most styles of music, rock, blues, funk, soul music, if you're like a hard hitter all the time, it's probably not going to sound good. I'll give you an example. Here's a guitar tone. If I go... just doesn't sound good, but if I go... So your touch on the instrument is a big part of your tone, right? So I would work on your touch to kind of, if you're a heavy hitter, lighten it up a little bit. The big advantage too, if you're a heavy hitter and you want to work on your tone, is not only do you'll probably get a better tone by playing lighter, you'll also kind of gain dynamic range. Now you can play louder, you can play softer, you've got scope to move. And one way to work on this is a really good idea, this is something I've done a lot, is put a track on and then try and balance to the track, right? So if I play this beat here, that I used in the intro, I'm just going to balance to this. Okay, and then what we do is do the same thing, but turn your amp up about 30% louder. Like that's significantly louder. Put the beat back on, or the backing track, or whatever you're using. can see straight away I'm having to like play much softer in order to balance to the track. And do that for a little while, say 20 minutes. And what you'll find is that you'll get to a point where that becomes your norm. Right? Your mid-ground of where you play is significantly lighter than what it may have been beforehand, right? And you'll get a better tone. If you need more gain, turn the gain up on the amp or on the Fractal or on whatever you're using, right? Because it's not about the equipment, it's about you and what you do, right? It's one of the keys to the AC/DC guitar sound, right? The Angus Young thing is those guys have a very light touch and use the amp to get the thing, right? Apparently Mutt Lang that produced their stuff was all about that, and Tom Bukovac I know worked with him and said that that was his big thing that he imparted to him, was just play lighter and let the amp do the work, because that's where the tone comes from, right? The last thing I would say too is if you want to have a good tone, this may come as a surprise to a lot of people, this is actually really, really important to having a good tone. It's having a good sense of rhythm. I remember recording a saxophone player one time, and I've talked about this story quite a bit, but I remember recording a saxophone player one time, and he was having an off night, and he was kind of all over the show. This guy was a bit like that sometimes. Love him to bits, but, you know, he wasn't having a good night. So we just decided, let's call the session, and let's come back the following day and redo it. He came back in the following day, and he played the same parts, but he was this time on it, right? He was like right on the beat of where everyone else was playing. We listened to them side by side, and the funny thing was, not only did his tone get better when he was rhythmically accurate, but everybody else's did too. Because all of a sudden now there's a blend between his saxophone and the bass and drums and guitar and whatever other instruments we had. There was a blend between it that made everything sound richer and warmer. When he was playing more out of time, like he was having the rough night, everything sounded muddy. Like the drums sounded muddy. I remember cueing it and going, this isn't working. Like, we were trying stuff. But then when it was rhythmically accurate, all of a sudden there was a clarity in the music and there was a clarity in the tone, right? You could hear every instrument. You could hear every note out of every instrument. It was really cool. So that's something I think about a lot, right? But if your rhythm is good, then the tone is good. So to recap, I would say first have a sound in your head. If you don't have that, you're not going to find a good tone. I would say experiment with the equipment you have to try and reproduce those tones, right? Try new gear, try old gear, try everything you can to just get those sounds with whatever you've got. Third thing I would say is to play lighter, generally, and you'll get a better tone. Fourth thing I would say is play rhythmically more accurate and it'll improve your tone. Hope this has been useful. These are things that I think about a lot. I think tone is really, really important. I think some people focus on it too much, but it really is important. Because the thing is, even if you play well and you have a crappy tone, it's like the music is not reaching the audience in the way it should, and therefore they're not going to get the full experience of what they should do. Yeah, hope it's been useful. Anyway, I'll play out with some more stuff. I was enjoying that funky beat.